Hello and welcome to Worlds Apart. There's been a notable warming up in polls to the idea of cannabis legalization in recent decades, even though governments around the world are not really rushing to follow through on that. Will Ireland become the next to decriminalize Mary Jane? Well, to discuss that, I'm now joined by Flanagan, a member of the Irish Parliament and a long-time supporter of such move. Mr. Flanagan, thank you very much for your time. I know that you've been campaigning for cannabis legalization pretty much throughout your political career, but most recently it seems that there is a real momentum towards that, not just in Ireland, but also pretty much around the Western world. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think at this stage, the vast majority of people in the Western world have worked out that the criminalisation of cannabis users is not working. And in Ireland alone, it is estimated that there are up to 250,000 people who use cannabis every year. There are 100,000 people who have ended up with a criminal record for possession as a result of it. And at this stage, I think people have worked out that the current strategy is not working. It's leaving money in the hands of the criminals, and it's actually making cannabis a far more dangerous substance.
Now, I know that you recently introduced a bill on the cannabis legalization to the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, and some of your fellow MPs have been pretty skeptical. Some are even openly critical of such proposal. With all the awareness that you mentioned earlier, why do you think there is still such a strong opposition to this move?
Well, I suppose the reality is that the vast majority of the members of our Dáil, or the members of our Parliament, appear to be opposed to this legislation. And I would suggest that the reason why they would be opposed is that they are afraid as being seen as soft on drugs somehow, and that they're not being as hardline as maybe they might expect their voters for them to be. And at this stage, it's becoming clear to me that the general public have actually moved on this issue. You look at what they call our paper of record here in this country, the Irish Times. You read the articles that have been written about this proposed legislation, and it is quite clear from the comments that have been made, hundreds of them, that it seems that the Irish public have woken up to the fact that the war on cannabis has failed and that there needs to be another strategy.
I know that people who oppose decriminalization of cannabis sometimes happen to be smokers, sometimes happen to be consumers of hard liquor, and I think by now it's not even debated that the health implications of using both tobacco and alcohol are much more detrimental, both on personal level and for national healthcare systems. But at the same time, you can't really claim that cannabis is good for your health. So I wonder, can you really justify, the decriminalization of one unhealthy substance by claiming that, the rest is worse?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is actually nail the lie that is being put out there by some people, that actually cannabis is more harmful than tobacco and alcohol. And we had it on our national media over the last couple of weeks. But it is quite clear, according to the World Health Organization, that it is less harmful than alcohol and tobacco. But of course, everything is harmful in the wrong hands. A knitting needle is harmful in the wrong hands. And in the right hands, it means you can knit a jumper. But you wouldn't ban knitting needles on the basis that some people might misuse them. Now, there are many myths out there about cannabis, and one of them is this incorrect link to schizophrenia. And I think the best way to knock that myth is to look at Great Britain and its cannabis usage rates between 1972 and 2002. During that period, the amount of people who use cannabis in Great Britain increased fourfold in the general population. In those under 18 years of age, it actually increased 18-fold. If the studies that have been put out there attempting to link schizophrenia with cannabis were correct, then we would have seen a 27% increase in schizophrenia in Great Britain over that period, when in fact studies have quite clearly shown that at worst it has stayed the same, and actually at best there has been a reduction in the number of people with schizophrenia.
Supporters of cannabis legalization have long insisted that such a move would reduce the cost of maintaining law enforcement and criminal justice, but I think most recently they've been shifting to a different sort of argument, and that is that it would allow not only to save money but also make money. And in Ireland these days, I guess any money-making opportunity would be very appealing. Can cannabis offer a way out of austerity?
Well, look, obviously in itself, it's not going to be a way out of austerity for an economy like Ireland worth about 200 billion euros. It's not really going to change the position massively, but there are obvious financial gains. A study recently that came out of Israel suggested that it would actually save that country and make that country up to 450 million American dollars. And if you compare that to Ireland, we actually have twice the usage rates that they have in Israel. We have about half their population. So I don't think it would be unreasonable to suggest that it would be worth about 300 million euros to the Irish economy every year. There are savings to the criminal justice system due to the fact that there are 8,000 people every year in Ireland dragged before the courts, and this costs an awful lot of money. There is also the fact that those 100,000 people who have a criminal record currently are actually inhibited from getting involved in greater economic activity. And the reason behind that is because once you have a criminal record for possession of cannabis, you are no longer allowed to work in a really decent job. And even if legalisation was to free those 100,000 people up to produce an extra €1,000 a year for the economy, that is worth 100 million euros alone. So my figure of 300 million, actually, I think it is very conservative, but it's better to be careful on this rather than being accused of exaggerating down the line.
But if you look at the bill that you proposed so far, most of the measures that you suggested primarily deal with personal or communal use of cannabis. You are not, at this stage at least, promoting large-scale commercial cultivation. And I wonder, why restrain yourself with partial decriminalization? Because we hear all the time that Ireland needs growth. Why not facilitate that through the growth of cannabis?
Well, I actually think you're incorrect, and I think you've misinterpreted my bill. Because my bill calls for total legalisation, but it does also allow for the fact that many people would like to grow their own, or also people would like to buy it from a not-for-profit organisation, such as a cannabis social club, like they've set up in Barcelona. But we have also allowed for the commercial sector. We have commercial licences, we have retail licences, and let's say just from a practical point of view, if my bill was passed, it would mean in the morning that a person who wanted to use cannabis could go into a shop to purchase it, they could go into a coffee shop to purchase it, they can possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis themselves if they don't have a licence to grow it, but alternatively they would have the option of growing it themselves. Now, many people probably think that if it's legalised they would grow it themselves, but I think all we need to do is look at the alcohol market. It is not rocket science to make alcohol, but the vast majority of people don't make alcohol, even in a country like Ireland, which I believe has a problem with alcohol. And the reason why they don't is because of convenience. And I think you will see something very similar in the cannabis market. But the biggest saving that I believe would occur is as a result of what Professor David Nutt from the Drugs Advisory Committee in Great Britain said. He estimates that alcohol usage would reduce by 25% if cannabis was legalised. In Ireland, the stats are as follows. Alcohol abuse costs this economy up to 3.4 billion euros every year. If we reduce alcohol usage in this country by a quarter, it wouldn't be unrealistic to say there's another 700 to 800 million euros that we can actually use for youth unemployment, to help the elderly who can't get a decent health service at the moment, and it could be spent in the legitimate taxed economy as opposed to leaving it with criminals and people who are very dangerous.
You just mentioned alcoholic beverages, and Ireland has quite a few brands that help people relax, and I know that the sales of Irish whiskey are increasing all over the world, especially in the American market. The same is happening with the sales of Irish beer. Would you like Ireland to be known or even famous for your brand of cannabis?
Well, I wouldn't particularly want the country to be known for that, but sadly at the moment it is very well known for a far more harmful drug, so I can't see how it would make it any worse than the current situation. But my ambition on this isn't that we'll end up with a large-scale export. I would like to see, from an environmental perspective anyway, that we apply the proximity principle. We grow it and we use it as close as possible in the same place, because the idea that it'll end up like alcohol, where you'll have massive advertising, etc., that would really turn me off. And in my bill, there are serious impositions when it comes to advertising cannabis, and in particular, we have made the decision not to allow it to be advertised with sport, even though the government, who will probably vote against this bill, are actually balking at the idea of taking the advertisement of a far more harmful drug, alcohol, out of sport at the moment, because they say sport can't afford it. Bit ironic.
And you touched upon a very interesting phenomenon that is taking place in Ireland these days. You mentioned austerity before, and I know that people, because they are so constrained for money, are saving on clothing, communication, transport. But as you pointed out, the consumption of alcohol is increasing in Ireland. And isn't that a reason, ultimately, to shelve your proposal for a little while and wait until social conditions are a bit better? You know, the rates of unemployment, the rates of depression go down, because you know that people turn to these substances to escape the harsh reality. So if we've seen that with alcohol, why don't you think that's not going to happen with cannabis?
Well, as I've already said on many occasions, alcohol is a far more harmful drug than cannabis. And if it was a case that cannabis didn't exist, that people currently didn't use it, or that it wasn't here, then your argument would be stronger. But the reality is, it is here, and it is here to stay. It is not going to disappear off this planet. And we have a choice. We either allow the criminals to be the vendors, or we allow the legitimate taxed economy to be the vendors. That is the decision that we have to make at the moment. I know I would prefer for this money to go to our health service than the type of people who would shoot you over this issue.
But I think the problem both with alcohol and other sorts of substances is moderation. You know, even alcohol in itself is not a problem. We all know about drinking a glass of wine a day and it being good for your heart. But the problem is, of course, that in the time of social upheaval, at the time of economic hardship, people have difficulties self-regulating and self-moderating. So why don't you think that something like this could happen? Because you are adding one more substance to that lineup of substances that can be used for that purpose.
I actually don't believe we're adding any new substance. As I've already said, it is already out there. And as Professor David Nutt has said, he believes alcohol usage would reduce by 25%. So I believe we would see a societal gain. But there is also the other important point. At the moment, when people buy cannabis in this country and in most countries around the world, they do not know how strong it is. They don't know what the percentage of THC to CBD is, which is very important because one is a psychotic and the other is an antipsychotic. And currently, in the Republic of Ireland, people are actually mixing cannabis with other substances to increase its weight, which is turning it into a very, very carcinogenic substance. And in some cases, they're mixing it with psychiatric drugs. So if it was legalised, not only would it take it away from the black economy, it would also make it infinitely safer because people would know what they were using, exactly what they were using.
Mr. Flanagan, we have to take a short break now, but when we come back, the proponents of cannabis legalization claim that it may provide a much-needed boost, economic boost, but is austerity really the best or possibly the worst time to attempt such a move? That's coming up in a few moments on Worlds Apart. Welcome back to Worlds Apart, where we are discussing the pros and cons of cannabis legalization with Luke Ming Flanagan, an Irish Member of Parliament. Mr. Flanagan, just before the break, we touched upon the rising alcohol consumption in this country. And I know that there is a broader discussion here in Ireland on possibly introducing a minimum pricing for alcohol as one of the ways of reducing habit drinking, especially among younger people. If such a proposal, if such a bill was introduced before the Dáil, would you support something like that?
Yeah, I actually would, and I have been a champion of the whole idea of trying to reduce our drink usage for the last 15 or 16 years. I've always actually believed that alcohol advertising with sport is the biggest contradiction of all time. But I actually do not think the government will take this seriously, because when I started talking about this topic, I didn't actually realise how unpopular it was. The amount of people who told me I was wrong, that sport needs alcohol advertising and you can't put up the price of alcohol, was phenomenal. And I would imagine that our government are hearing the same opinions. And really what they're doing at the moment is they've set up a committee to look at it